The question I have for you is, do you want those people with these top skills, this top intelligence, this top ability, do you still want them to have a fixed mindset about those skills and abilities? Do you want them coming into the organization believing that I am the king, I am the top, right? There's nothing I can do wrong. It makes people fragile. It puts people on a pedestal and it makes them afraid to fall off. So they're not going to take risks. They're not going to make mistakes.
Welcome to the Love in Action Podcast, the show that explores all the ways you can evolve into the best version of yourself as a leader. I'm your host, executive coach, speaker, and author, Marcel Schwantes. I believe that when we show up with our full humanity to work and lead from a place of love and care and inclusion, it will make a radical difference in your leadership, your business, and your bottom line. This is a show about love as a leadership and business strategy. Let's do this.
Hey, welcome. Glad you are here, and thank you so much for joining us today. Listen, if you like what you hear today, will you do us a small favor? Write us a short review. It's going to take about 10 seconds, and I'm going to show you how to do it right now. So open up Apple Podcast on your phone and click on the Love in Action Podcast, and then scroll past all, let me see if you can see this on YouTube. Scroll past all the episodes, and you're going to see a little section. I'll put it right there, ratings and reviews. You see I have a 4.9 rating. Not bad, huh? And then right below that, you're going to see the button, or not a button, but the write a review link. So if you click on write a review, voila, you're all set. Just write a quick review. We would really appreciate it. So to kind of set the table for today's show, here are a few questions to consider. Why are some teams or even whole organizations more collaborative, more innovative, even more resilient? Okay. Or how about this one? Why are some companies so much better than other companies at bringing out the best in their people? So my guest today may have the answer to these questions. I'm going to be speaking shortly with social psychologist, Dr. Mary Murphy. She wrote the book, Cultures of Growth, and there is the cover if you're watching it on YouTube. And that was released back in March of this year. Now, if you're a fan of Carol Dweck and her work on mindset, you'll recall that Carol Dweck showed the consequences of thinking either with a fixed or a growth mindset, right? Well, and the reason I bring up Dweck is because Mary Murphy is protégé of Carol Dweck, having been mentored by Dweck while pursuing her PhD at Stanford. So Mary Murphy takes Carol Dweck's research one step further. She says organizations, not just individuals, actually possess a defining mindset. So we're going to dissect whether your organization has a fixed mindset or what Mary terms as cultures of genius. I've coached a few of those, versus cultures of growth, the title of her book. So Dr. Murphy has spent over a decade pioneering research on motivation, performance, and interracial relations at Stanford and Indiana University. She is professor of psychological and brain sciences at Indiana University. And I can't wait to have her share her award-winning knowledge and strategies to teach us how to develop a culture of growth. And don't forget, at the end of the episode, Mary and I are going to continue the conversation in the green room on Substack. That conversation will be 100% practical, actionable. It will be a how-to conversation for leaders, straight from Mary's research. So see the link in the show notes if you'd like to join us there. Dr. Mary Murphy now joins us. Welcome to the Love in Action Podcast.
Thanks, Marcel. I'm so happy to be here with you. I can't wait for this conversation.
Me neither. Let's get going. All right. So you ready for this?
I'm ready.
What's your story?
What's your story, man? Well, I have many stories, like many people, but I think that starting from the beginning is a good place to start. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas. I am the child of a white dad and a Hispanic mom. My family on my mom's side's from Mexico. And I think growing up in this kind of bicultural environment, I oftentimes saw how the differences are when you're in one kind of culture or another, and kind of this code switching, and how the environment around us really kind of shapes which identities come online at any given moment. And I think I really understood this culture clash pretty early in life when growing up in San Antonio, it's about 65, maybe 70% Hispanic. And so growing up, I saw all mainstream society, Hispanic teachers, doctors, city government leaders, and kind of grew up in that milieu and was seen through that lens. But then I go to graduate school out at Stanford. And I realized Mary Murphy is not a particularly Latino name. And, I don't present that way. I'm kind of light skinned, with other family members of mine are a little darker. And so I really recognized how different people, given different contexts and what they know about us, what parts of our identity are hidden and what parts of our identity are things that people can see, how this kind of shapes our experiences and what are the cues people use to understand who you are and how to interact with you. And so that kind of led me to big questions on culture and how we navigate different cultures and what are the cues that we're in one culture or another culture. And that's a question that I brought with me from undergrad, where I went to UT Austin in Texas, out to Stanford, where I was very fortunate to work with Claude Steele and Carol Dweck. And then moving forward, building my own lab, working with my own students on these kinds of questions.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think you're the first guest that we talk about culture here all the time. Even in my work, as a coach and trainer, I go out and help companies establish a good, healthy, collaborative culture. But your research, you basically have sort of ascertained that you either worked for a fixed culture or a culture of genius, or, like I said in my introduction, or a culture of growth. So I thought that would be the starting point for us to just kind of dive in on. Well, I'd be curious. Okay, which one am I working for or with or in, right? So how do you determine whether I work for one or the other?
Yeah. Well, in a fixed mindset culture, as you say, I gave the term back in 2010. My first paper on this was really I called it a culture of genius. And in these fixed mindset cultures, the focus is really going to be on star performers, with this belief that there are some people who have just more inherent capability, intelligence, superior abilities. And what we're going to do is we're going to put all the team and the resources around those stars, and those stars are going to lead us to the promised land, right?
Right.
And so this fixed mindset culture, you either have it or you don't. And so everyone wants to be in the bucket of the haves. I'm smart, I'm intelligent, I'm capable, I'm good, I'm competent. And in these cultures, we do see that people are competing for that kind of status, for their reputation, while they're also trying to deliver on their work. And we can talk about what the consequences of that are later on. But this is often contrasted with the growth mindset culture, what I call this culture of growth. And that is at the core, has the belief that given the right kind of support, mentoring, seeking help when you're stuck, that everyone, regardless of where they are in their current levels of talent and ability, everyone can develop and contribute. And the truth is that in most organizations we've worked in, no organization is one or the other, right? There is a mindset culture continuum, and organizations can move along that continuum depending on, right, outside forces, who the leader is at any given moment, and there's microcultures inside organizations. So that in every company we've seen, oftentimes there is a dominant mindset culture, but what really matters for people on the ground is the mindset microculture of their team within it, based on their local leader, right? Because it's those dynamics that I'm going to be facing with day after day after day. So we have to pay attention to the large C culture of the organization, but also the small C culture of these microcultures on our teams, and also in our families and in our communities, which we can talk about as well. These exist across different levels.
Didn't even think about families and our communities. Okay, so let me backtrack to let's get back to the whole idea of we want geniuses. I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Yeah, please.
Because you get this a lot. Like, what is Mary talking about? Of course, we want some geniuses. I mean, I'm in an IT company or an engineering company. It's those geniuses, they argue, that are the ones that like hold all of the knowledge, right? All of the information to take the company forward. So we want to hire more smart, high performers. What do you say to that?
Yeah. Well, I think that, it's really important, and we see this in our own research and also in our practical work in companies, that it's important to distinguish the ability, like high and low ability, from a fixed and growth mindset, right? Everybody wants high performers. Everyone wants stars, right? Everyone wants really top people. The question I have for you is, do you want those people with these top skills, this top intelligence, this top ability? Do you still want them to have a fixed mindset about those skills and abilities? Do you want them coming into the organization believing that I am the king, I am the top, right? There's nothing I can do wrong. It makes people fragile. It puts people on a pedestal and it makes them afraid to fall off. So they're not going to take risks. They're not going to make mistakes. In an organization that just looks for geniuses and just kind of tries to collect them, everyone knows that a new star is being born every day. So they're looking over their shoulder. Is that the next genius coming behind me, right? And it makes them more risk averse and playing it safe and not wanting to collaborate with people. Why? Because I want the credit. I don't want my team to take the credit. I want to take the credit because this is a culture of genius and I have to show myself to be the top genius at all times. And so we see this culture of genius problem that, the highest performers in organizations actually prefer the culture of growth. Why? Because these environments are more rigorous and they're more supportive. They actually pay attention to what the development of people are and whether people's effort is actually leading to great outcomes or not. They're not just going to take the resident genius's gut, for it. And so they really do pay attention more to what's going on the ground and whether or not effort being put in the organization is actually moving people forward. And then the last thing I'll say about this is that, these cultures of genius, they're even bad for the individuals who are recognized as the top geniuses, right? It's almost like putting them in a straitjacket where they cannot make any mistakes. They cannot fail because then they will lose their status as being the top dog in the organization, right? Or on a team. And so you see that people generally tend to become a little bit self-conscious, a little bit, at the far end, kind of terrified of underperforming. So they play it safe, they hide their mistakes, and that gets into all kinds of questions around ethics and integrity that we see as often the downfall of many of these teams and organizations that have really strong cultures of genius.
Wow. So playing with the whole continuum that you've sort of found about that we actually move along the continuum between fixed and growth mindset. So could we start with a growth, a sort of a culture of growth, and we're like, yes, all right, we're collaborative, but then we realize that everybody it's sort of a homogenous culture in the room where everybody's thinking the same because everybody's smart. And then the tendency now is we are stuck in a fixed, speaking of continuum, right? We travel back to the fixed mindset and now we're stuck because we think, okay, we can't get any smarter. This is as good as it gets.
Yep. You can see that too, where people will just rest on their laurels, believing that they're the leaders, they're the smartest in the room, right? But some of the most famous, or I should say infamous, cultures of genius are places like Enron, right? The smartest guys in the room. A whole documentary and book written on this idea where they were trying to separate out the stars from those who were just merely super bright, right? And that becomes sort of the focus. And all the resources go to those individuals, and then they try to maintain that status and have the unethical issues. Theranos is another one. WeWork is another one. We know who the geniuses are, and they tend to put this pressure on everyone else in order to make their vision the thing that happens, regardless of what's actually going on the ground, not in a learning mode, but in a performing mode where performance is going to be the ultimate thing and the outcome is all that matters. And we see that when we drive work that way, we get all kinds of problems around ethics, integrity, and also collaboration and innovation.
Well, I can see that playing out in Silicon Valley with the whole bro tech culture. Right there is a good example of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly.
All right. So bring us back to you said that you argue that we have mindset we have a misunderstanding of what mindset is. What have we gotten wrong about mindset?
Yeah. I think we are overdue. Mindset, Carol produced incredible work, especially introducing these ideas to us in the late 70s, early 80s. And since then, much of the research has focused on mindset at the individual level. What's your mindset? How does it affect you, Marcel? What's my mindset? How does it affect me? And really showing what the consequences of that are in many different domains, in our romantic relationships, in our workplace context, in our family life. And I think that as this idea of the fixed and growth mindset got really popular, especially in the domain of education, where now Carol's book Mindset is taught in almost every teacher training, and Teach for America, they all read it, right? And I think it's become somewhat memeified. If you were to Google fixed and growth mindset and look at Google Images, you are going to see a million different images that have these two heads on them. And in those heads, you'll see in the brain area, it says fixed mindset. In the other brain area, it says growth mindset. And oftentimes it says at the top, which mindset do you have? And, this is ironic if you think about mindset and like the growth mindset. It's like you have to pick, do you have the fixed mindset or do you have the growth mindset? It's fixed, one or the other, And so the irony of this is pretty funny. But I think that the consequence of thinking about this is that we've gotten three things wrong here. One, it really shows this false dichotomy. It's either a fixed or a growth mindset. You have one or you have the other. But the truth is, from especially the last 10 and 15 years of research that we've been doing to really understand the dynamic nature of mindset, is that we all have both mindsets, right? I come home at the end of the day, I'm exhausted. I have quite a fixed mindset about the right way to load the dishwasher. All right. Like there are places where our fixed mindset just comes out. We all have both. And we travel between these mindsets based on the local situation and the people around us. The second thing we got wrong is thinking about mindset as only in our mind. Then the solution becomes just change your mind. And as a psychologist, I can tell you that that's much easier said than done, right? And it's not going to be robust or sustainable or replicable. Like then you have to change every individual's mind every single time that they are moving to their fixed mindset. And, how do you do this when you have new workers coming in every week and you're trying to promote people across time? The better, more sustainable way, and what we actually know from the research, is that mindset isn't just located in our mind. It is influenced, as I said, by the people and the situations around us. And so the solution actually changes to not just get people to change their individual minds, but to change the culture around them so that everyone is naturally moved more to their growth mindset more of the time. And then the last way we've gotten it wrong is we think that mindset, because we're locating it in the head and it's just about the individual, is just about effort. It's just about try harder.
Yeah.
Try harder. And we know that if you keep hitting your head against the wall over and over and over again, right, it's your head that's going to explode, not the wall. And so, what we know is that a true growth mindset, effort is important, sure, but really what's important is what I call effective effort. It is actually working hard and moving in the right direction, seeking help, seeking mentorship, all the things that are going to help us learn, grow, and develop. And so when we just tell people to try harder without giving them the strategies, the skills, the resources they need, the mentoring they need, that's not a true growth mindset culture. That's just putting the blame on the individual. That's a false mindset culture. So I think these are the ways in which understanding these helps us chart the path forward as to how to build these true cultures of growth.
So you may be a person that you would consider on a personal level, somebody that has a growth mindset being held back because you're in a culture of genius.
Yep.
Yep.
Absolutely. One of my favorite studies, I'll just describe, I won't be too academic, I promise, Marcel. One of my favorite studies, and the study that actually changed my personal mind about how important mindset culture was compared to individual mindset, was a study that my collaborators, David Yeager, Carol Dweck, and there were like 15, 20 researchers on this paper, including myself. And what we did was we created these modules where we were going to teach students, and these were high school students, about the growth mindset, the neuroscience behind it, when you seek help, what happens to your brain, neuroplasticity, that sort of thing. So we made these science modules and we released them across the country to more than 12,000 first-year high school students. And we wanted to see if it would have impacts on two outcomes. One, their grades. Would it actually replicating some of the previous work? Would learning about the growth mindset actually motivate people and they would perform better? End of year high school grades, GPA. We also wanted to look at what we called intellectual risk taking. In American high school curriculum, some of the most difficult and rigorous courses are these advanced STEM courses after Algebra 2 and later. So we wanted to see whether learning about the growth mindset might motivate students to put themselves in these more intellectually challenging classes across time. Well, we did the study, and what did we find? Indeed, when students got the growth mindset modules compared to some control modules we created, it did increase their GPA and it increased their intellectual risk-taking. But we also looked at the places where it didn't work, and it didn't work in two places. We had a randomized control trial, nationally representative sample, gold standard experiment here. It didn't work in two places. One, guess where? Any ideas? Teachers. When teachers had more of a fixed mindset or engaged in more fixed-minded practices, telling students about the growth mindset had zero impact on their grades or their intellectual risk-taking. And you can think about this as leaders. You can teach employees all about the growth mindset, but if their leader doesn't have a growth mindset themselves or doesn't engage in growth-minded practices, it will have zero impact because, as you say, you can have the most growth-minded individual, but if they're operating in this strong culture of growth or culture of genius, they are not going to be able to use or benefit from their personal growth mindset. The other place that we found it didn't work was in peers. When the teacher had not attended to the culture of the peers in the classroom. So when the students didn't want to take on challenges, where it wasn't cool to learn, where you got made fun of if you made a mistake, if you didn't understand, learning about the growth mindset there had no impact on students' outcomes. It was only when the teacher had created a culture of support and challenge in the classroom with the peers coming on board. It's cool to ask a question. We're not going to leave anyone behind in our learning. In that case, you see huge benefits of learning about the growth mindset. So, this culture can trump the effects of just having an individual growth mindset. That's why it's so important.
This is interesting. I'm a big sports fan. And so
Yeah.
I always like to bring sort of the stories and the analogies of sports into the conversation. And you mentioned in the book about Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen back in the Bulls dynasty of the 90s, right? They just like ran over people and won 6 championships in 10 years. So basically, the example that you just gave in that context is that Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, they were in a culture of growth because look who their head coach was.
Yeah.
If you followed the Bulls,
Yep.
Bill Jackson
Yep.
had an incredible growth mindset, and and that permeated the whole organization in how the Bulls thought, how they played. It was very much teamwork, right? I mean, sure, Michael Jordan scored all those points, but look at who he was surrounded by.
That's right. Only enabled by the team around him, right? So if you put either Michael Jordan or Scottie Pippen on a different team, different players, different coach, different team culture, would they have achieved the same success? I think that they still might have been great because they're high-skilled individuals, right? But it's unlikely we would see the same outcome as the team outcome was allowed to be, because that team required everybody to be coordinated, to be dedicated to learning growth, to in the practices, focusing on mastery rather than just do we make the shot or do we not, sort of how we do this together. All of that kind of led to what I think is like a very strong, on the culture continuum, it's a very strong culture of growth.
Yeah. Okay. So you already mentioned Enron, getting back to corporate,
Yeah.
as sort of being that culture of genius, and look where I got them. I'm thinking of other companies. I don't know. Most recently, Wells Fargo with the whole checking account fiasco, and Volkswagen with the emissions software. But can you think of any other companies in your research that sort of resembles that culture of genius, and that got them in trouble?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I see these cultures of genius are really challenging because people feel in competition with each other. So they start to do things that really undermine other people. It starts maybe very subtly, where you kind of get people leaving people off calendar invites, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't invite you to that thing, or hoarding information. And I think that in those kinds of contexts, that's where we see a lot of organizations start to really have this internal ethical problem. So you mentioned Wells Fargo. I think that's a great example where, the top-down pressure was really just to open as many possible accounts as possible. And what happened with that is that people felt pressure. They knew if they didn't open X number of accounts, then they would be fired. And they were in oftentimes small cities or small towns. And they're like, we already have 50% of the town with open accounts. What are we going to do here? And started to then, have fraud where people were opening accounts without people's permission. And I think that that's a really good, you had this genius vision, you had this genius, view of it, and you had this top-down expectation without actually understanding, what actually is needed to reach those outcomes in an ethical kind of way. Another thing I've heard about and seen is in various call centers. So I worked in a couple of these different contexts where we were seeing, and I talk about a little bit of this example in the book, where we talk about how in call centers, a lot of times it's how many calls can you manage, right? Like you just want to get through as many possible calls during your shift. And so what people were doing was actually answering the phone, hearing people, okay, they're calling to close their account. Okay, I'll close the account. Then I can have another call. Then I can do it again and again and again. It's the most efficient and fast way if my goal is to just have as many calls as I possibly can.
Right.
What is that doing to the bottom line, right? Actually, can we take a learning perspective to what's actually happening? You're getting all these closed accounts, as many as possible that can come in. And instead, people who tried to shift this mindset culture inside these call centers started to say, wait a minute here. Like, we need to not just close the account, we need to actually talk to them to find out what's wrong with their service. What's wrong? Can we actually save the account? Because that's actually what's going to help the bottom line of the organization. And yes, it means that we're actually going to spend more time with people on the phone. They're going to have less calls, but you're going to have more saved accounts. And so this culture of growth lens takes us into a learning kind of mode where we can actually look at the effort that's being expended and is it actually moving us towards our goal or is it not, right? And so this is kind of one of the ways to turn these big questions around where we might have unintentionally incentivized the very thing we don't want to be happening for organizational success.
Let's transition a little bit here and bring DEI into the conversation. So
sorry.
I would say in the last year or two, it's taken a big hit.
Yeah.
But I still think that, and you tell me, I mean, does a culture of genius affect your diversity and inclusion strategies?
Yep. Yeah, it does. So, I think it's really helpful to think about how cultures of genius and how cultures of growth differ on DEI if we focus first on the culture of genius. So if you take genius, the word genius, and you again put it in our friend Google search and you look at the Google images that come up, what faces are you going to see, right? When you search the word genius.
Elon Musk?
You're going to see Elon Musk. You're going to see thousands and thousands of pages of Albert Einstein, because in this culture, Albert Einstein is seen as the genius. You might see Thomas Edison. You might see Darwin. You might see Steve Jobs, right? Elon Musk, certainly.
Bill Gates.
Yeah, Bill Gates. These people, there's some commonalities, right? They tend to be men. They tend to be white. They tend to be of a certain educational or class background. And so what we know from our research, and we have actually studied this question quite a lot, published many papers on it, both in large scale companies and in smaller, like Series A, Series B startup organizations. In all of these either emerging beginning cultures or in very established legacy company cultures, we see that when you have a stronger culture of genius, we have this prototype culturally, this shared prototype of who a genius is, what they look like, what their background is like. And what we see is that people engage in this subtle prototype matching process where we say, okay, this is who we're looking for when we're recruiting people. This is who we're looking for when we are positively evaluating them, when we are promoting them. We want the geniuses, and in our mind, those geniuses are automatically associated with these various characteristics. And so we can see in analyses we've done of the entire Fortune 1000 and in hundreds of startup organizations that when you have a stronger culture of genius, you do see more homogeneity, more similarity, less diversity at the very top of these organizations because they're building a culture of genius and it's going to match who that genius prototype is as to who those geniuses are. In the culture of growth, you get less of this. Why? Because it's not so important as to whether you match this genius prototype as an individual. There, in a culture of growth, it's about how far you've come, the distance you've traveled, how many challenges have you overcome, knowing that the distance that you've traveled from A to B is going to predict the distance you're going to go from B to C to D and into the future. It's about learning. It's about development. Who is committed to that? And there's much more of a broad prototype of success for who can learn, who can develop, who's overcome challenges. And so we see that when we match to that prototype, you just get a much broader swath of people who are identified as those we should recruit, those we should promote, those we should evaluate in the company. And so naturally speaking, these cultures of genius tend to be more homogenous, less diverse, less inclusive, and the cultures of growth more so.
Okay, I want to leave some how-to stuff for our green room conversation, but I do want to touch on making the shift
Yeah.
from a culture of genius to a culture of growth. And one of those things I wanted to touch on is risk taking. You mentioned it already, so expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think that if people are not willing to take risks, they're never going to learn what works, what doesn't work, and how to move forward. And we just know that mistakes and risk taking is the key to innovation, to creativity, to the next stage of success for people. And what the culture of genius does is it makes us very concerned about taking risks, right? It's a way more vulnerable situation than would otherwise be normal. And in the culture of growth, what we see is that you can put in some learning structures so that we can understand what the measured risks are that we want to take. We can create sort of small experiments along the way. I'm going to take this risk, but I'm going to pause after I've taken the first small step toward that risk. And I'm going to see if that effort, if that change actually drove me closer to the outcome I want to see. It helps us understand when we need to pivot earlier. We don't have to wait to the very end of a risk, right, to see whether or not it paid off, because in a true culture of growth, it's about learning and there's those structures. And so we're able to see sooner rather than later whether we need to pivot, whether we need to try something else on the way to advancing this risk out in the world. And so we see this. I worked with Twitter back when it was led by Jack Dorsey and his global legal team. And they were really challenged by whether or not to label speech and enforce the user agreement on their platform. And this was many years ago, previous presidential election. And he was being called in front of Congress, like, this is a problem, that there's so much misinformation on these platforms. What are you going to do to inform the public about what's true and what's not true? And so the global legal team said, absolutely not. We're not doing this. Like, it's going to open us up to all kinds of challenges, all kinds of lawsuits. But nonetheless, the government and others are like, this needs to happen. So to this question of risk taking, really understanding what the mindset culture is currently, and then what would need to change for people to be willing to take these risks. What could we learn along the way? Could we pilot something, pilot some changes, small, gather some data, see if it's having the worst outcomes that we can imagine, or is it actually moving us toward the direction of what we hope that these kinds of labels might do for informing the public, right? And then once they started to learn, they were able to then see and scale the ones that were successful, right? So this is how, so you think about how you take on this risk. You don't just jump whole hog in, right? That's not a true culture of growth. You put in place these learning mechanisms. You do the small experiment, and that helps make risk real for people.
Yeah, and you won't know it until you actually run the experiment. So to your point,
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm hopeful that people, as more companies embody the principles, practices, and behaviors of a growth mindset, that we're gonna turn a corner and see less cultures of genius. But I want you to maybe take out your crystal ball and look ahead. I don't know, 5, 10, years. How do you see cultures of growth evolving in the future?
Yeah. Well, I think that the current and future state of the world and the way we work is going to be shifting massively, especially with the age of AI and the advent of that and how quickly that changes, even week to week, right? And when I think about what AI is, I think about AI as a general technology, right? And it really, the magic of the AI is how we apply it in our own local context to help support our work, to support the questions we have, or how we can move forward using that tool of AI to help support that change. And so when I think about what it's going to take to win in the age of AI, I think it's going to take people. And I think it's going to take people who are interested and motivated and willing to learn something new, right? To experiment and identify new case studies and case examples of how we can use this in our own organizations. People who are willing to make mistakes, because working with this at the beginning, right, there is some mistake making that goes along. How do we learn from that? How do we share that widely so the whole organization learns quickly about how to optimally use this kind of new technology? Willing to know that good ideas are going to come from everywhere. So there's going to be a new case use that is identified over here in team B, but we need that to be shared with team A, C, D, E, and F, right? So how do we develop that kind of thing? And I think in every new technology and every new problem, this culture of growth is a way that we can kind of approach what our new challenges and opportunities are and some of our biggest problems that we have in organizations. This culture of growth can help us because it's really helping people. The famous quote out there about culture is Peter Drucker's, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I agree, but I don't think it's any culture. I think it's a growth-minded culture that is really going to help people rise to the challenge of whatever it is that we are facing when it comes to the future of work and AI as we look forward.
Mary, I'm a big believer of first steps. For something to happen, you got to take that first courageous step. So talk to the CEO, maybe the high-level HR person or a board of directors tasked with shaping culture. How do I begin this journey?
Yeah. Well, I think the first important thing, especially for high-level leaders, is to know thyself. So I think, one of the big parts of the book is really thinking about these mindset triggers that move us between our fixed and growth mindset. There are 4 of them. These come from sort of analyzing decades and hundreds of studies in the literature. There's evaluative situations, high effort situations, critical feedback, and the success of others. And these are the replicated, like very popular kind of situations or triggers that move individuals between their fixed and growth mindset. So as a leader, think about and know, is it critical feedback that really moves me to my fixed mindset? Is it when I see someone else praise, they get the award that I thought I might be up for, or I'm watching someone else's career, that CEO of that other organization, and that when they have a big success, it moves me to my fixed mindset? Is it about evaluative situations when I have to give a report or a high stakes presentation, or I have to pitch a new client, or think about a collaboration? Is that the context that moves me to my fixed mindset? So knowing our own mindset triggers helps us build teams around us and supports around us to help us move towards growth. Thinking about those microcultures, you build a microculture around yourself as a leader, and then understanding the mindset triggers of your team so that you know that when you're giving someone an assignment or you're giving someone critical feedback or you're praising other people on the team, are you unintentionally moving everyone else in the room to their fixed mindset because Tom is the star, right? And everyone else is going to be the non-stars. So, that's the kind of thing that I think, know yourself, know the triggers of your team. On the website for the book, we have a free quiz based on our research that people can take themselves and also with their teams to identify what your individual mindset triggers are and what your team's triggers are.
That's so fascinating. All right, as we wind down here, I don't profess to having asked all the right questions, but is there a question I should have asked that I didn't, that you wanted to get out?
We talked a lot about what these cultures of genius look like. I wonder if I could share an example of a very strong culture of growth. What's the opposite of that culture of genius, and what do those look like? So, I worked with Shell on some big questions, but the company I really want to talk about is Patagonia. I don't know if you have heard about what they have been doing, but Dean Carter there, who is the head of their HR at Patagonia, really has been inspired by this idea of sustainable agriculture. And, when it comes to planting fields, we will plant the plant, then we will pluck it and we'll take its fruit or we'll cut it down. And then we have to till that soil. And every time we till that soil, right, you are depleting that soil. And so and then you have to refertilize, put in some new resources, refertilize that context. And it's really a process of extraction. And he started to think about how we treat people in organizations. How much of that is extractive? What are we actually putting back into people? And can we actually take that model and think about what are some of the skills, tools, resources, strategies, mentoring strategies, learning opportunities that we can give people so that we are repleting and not coming from that extractive model, but instead thinking about how we actually create a sustainable and regenerative organizational context where everyone can thrive. That's a true culture of growth, right? It's not just saying adopt a growth mindset, everyone. It's like, here are the skills, the learning, the resources we're going to provide to help you learn, grow, and develop. We're going to be your partners in that. And making that real in the organization increases organizational trust, organizational commitment, motivation, engagement. People are not going to be leaving these organizations anytime soon because they feel like they are seen and that they're valued and that this is a place they can learn, grow, and develop.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, we bring it home with 2 questions as we do with
Great.
guests. Okay, the first one is the love question. Talk about, sticking with themes of that we've talked about. I mean, how do I lead with more actionable, practical love and care day in and day out?
Yeah. Well, I think there are a couple of things. One is, again, know your triggers and know the triggers of your mindset culture. The second is, I think that the reason you want to do that is because you want to be a guide to growth. You want to be a guide for yourself. How are you going to think about what are the challenges? What's the learning you want to do? We're coming to the end of the year. It's a great time to be thinking about what are the new challenges I want to take on for myself personally and professionally. How am I going to be sure that I'm always learning and growing? Talk about some self-love there with regards to my own learning and growth journey. And then how am I in the workplace going to be a guide for other people's growth? Start having those conversations. What do people on your team want to do that's going to help them learn, grow, and develop? Can you find opportunities for them that help meet those goals for those individuals? I think that's a really good place to start to try to be a guide for growth.
Yeah, that is so in line with my whole belief system around servant leadership as well. One of the big tenets of servant leadership is to develop others, to grow others.
Yes.
Very good, very good. Okay, bring us home. What is that one thing you would like us to walk away with?
I want everyone to look at everything through the lens of learning. And I'm going to challenge everyone. This is something I do in each one of my PhD classes, where I ask people, what's one outrageously growth-minded thing you can do for yourself this week? Because I think we owe it to ourselves to start to build these microcultures of growth around us. And so what is one outrageously growth-minded thing? Maybe you can ask for some critical feedback from people on your team, and you can practice receiving that feedback through the lens of the growth mindset. Look at everything through the lens of learning and figure out what data you need to gather, what do you need to hear that's really going to help you learn and take things to the next level.
That's perfect. And I have one for you listeners, and that is read Mary's book, Cultures of Growth. There it is. Mary, if people want to connect with you and ask you questions, where can you go?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, Mary Murphy, Mary C. Murphy, because Mary Murphy takes you to a million Mary Murphys all around the world. And also marycmurphy.com, that's the book's website. And then under resources, people can find those mindset triggers assessments. They can do a cues audit and look at the mindset cues in their teams and in their organizations to see where on the culture continuum does my team or my organization lie. So I invite people to come there and to do some work, figure out where they are themselves.
Perfect. And we invite you to continue the conversation with us in the green room. And again, this is bonus content that is 100% practical and for leaders to use to take next steps, get tools, lay down strategies, and implement some action steps. The link is in your show notes. And if you're watching it on YouTube, it's in the text area below your video, and would love for you to join us there. I'm going to ask questions to Mary, like what practical steps can managers take to encourage a growth mindset in their teams? I'm going to ask her, how do I personally model a growth mindset in meetings, in huddles, and one-on-ones? So head on over there. We will see you in the green room. Finally, you can keep the conversation going on social media with hashtag Love in Action Podcast, and look for my show notes as well as the YouTube link to this very conversation. And you can watch on my website, marcelschwantes.com. For Mary Murphy, I'm Marcel Schwantes. Keep loving well, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your leadership and business flourish.